Hello developers, writers, and everyone who loves game design.
Welcome to DLC Not Included, our weekly podcast where we discuss game development, the industry, and everything in between.
We are your hosts, Steele
and Teal. Glad you could join us.
All right, so welcome to everyone. We are broadcasting 2 hours earlier than usual because we have to get ready for the holiday season.
But we're still going to give you our same really good content.
Absolutely, going to give you our best, DLC Not Included, where we teach you all about game design.
All about it.
And today's topic is no different than the others because this is one of the ones that a player's going to notice.
If it's done wrong.
Yeah, like lighting.
Yeah.
And such, and audio. So what are we talking about today?
Today's topic is animation principles.
All right, so that is very important. Animation principles.
I just want to take a moment to say that this podcast is about the principles behind animation. We're not going to talk about actual techniques.
Right. I mean, you can go Google, you watch YouTube, and just look at things like keyframing, sequencing, whether you go in, whether you do like keyframes or whatever. Yeah. There's a ton of tutorials out there, whether you're working in 2D, hand-drawn 2D, pixel art, 3D. There's a lot to teach you the techniques. But we're going to go a step beyond that. We're talking about the principles.
Right.
And by the way, we're going to be using the term frames a lot in this podcast. And I know that frames, most people think of frames, they think of 2D animation, but the concepts are identical just for 3D. A frame is literally just a moment in which a state of animation is shown that progresses it.
Yes, that's exactly it.
Okay, so let's start at the very, very top of this and talk about why you need to learn animation principles, because when we talk to a lot of our solo devs, a lot of the people in the Studio Blue community, a lot of the people in the different communities where they're new devs, they're really focused a lot on level design. So they learn a lot from lighting.
Yeah.
Or they want to have good writing. So they focus on the writing, good character development. And a lot of times they don't think about animation because, well, it seems like it's its own terrifying monster.
And to a lot of people, it is.
But also, you can go buy an animation pack or whatever. But
true.
Why learn the principles of animation?
First of all, I just want to say that animation itself, just think about it.
Right.
It's more than just a series of frames.
Right.
That, make something move or showcase something.
Right.
Animation is really, it's a way to breathe life in anything. We're always talking about immersion and a good realistic player experience. This is it right here. Yeah. Animation.
Good animation will make a world feel alive. And if you look around the world, like look around the room you're in right now, or look outside the window if you're inside. If you're in a park right now, just look around, but look at the world. The world is not static. Something is moving. In here, we have a tower fan that's moving. We look a little bit beyond the studio downstairs and we see the ceiling fan is going. We can see the top of it.
Yeah.
We look outside. We see the tree swaying in the wind. We see the clouds coming in because it's going to rain.
It's going to rain.
It's going to rain. But, even here, if I look over at this monitor where the stream is, I can see the mic bars moving, from green to yellow. Things like that. So the world itself has a lot of motion in it.
So that needs to be in your game, as I said, to provide that realistic experience, that immersion.
But it goes beyond just static, things, people. Like, for example, I'm sitting here looking at Teal, and she just looked at me, and her hair, those red bangs of hair swished to the side when she looked at me.
Yeah.
And she just gave a nod, and her arms moved a little bit because the human body is not just a head.
Right.
But that's the things we think about, It's when people who are just starting out think of animation, they think of just accomplishing a goal.
Yeah.
But an animator, an artist, thinks of animation as a way to make the thing come alive.
Yeah, and so honestly, everybody needs animation in their games. Everybody needs it. And
everyone needs to learn the principles. Yes.
Right.
Yeah.
It doesn't matter your engine, doesn't matter your genre that you're working in. You need animation.
Right. So this is directed directly to the people in our community who work primarily in RPG Maker and Game Maker Studio. You don't get to take a seat to have bad animation or no animation just because you're in a easy-to-use engine.
Right.
You also have to apply these principles.
Yes, you do.
Just as much as if you're one of our audience members who works in the Unreal Engine and has to have very fluid animations in order to make their fantasy world look alive.
Yeah, because a game is a game. Yeah. I don't care about the engine.
Yeah.
This is what I'm playing.
Yeah.
So, yeah, we want to make sure that it's a living, breathing world visually.
Yep. Put it in the back of your head. Good animation will make your game look good.
Yeah.
But great animation will make your game look alive. Put that in the back of your head as we go through this.
So as we move forward, we want to talk about a couple of principles that you want to consider.
Right.
Now, some of these may sound a little strange to you, and that's okay. After this podcast, go ahead and look some of this stuff up, because all of these that we're going to mention, all of these principles, they need to be reflected somehow in your animation.
Yes.
In order to pull it all together.
A lot of the information that we got from this podcast was taken from several succinct sources. One of them was from a book, I believe, called The Art of Illusion. It was an old Disney book written by old Disney animators. But, you know, there are several works cited in here, including that one, and an article. I'll have to go ahead and post it on the VOD that talks about the animation techniques used in one of the Little Nemo games.
Perfect. Yeah, that's great.
And for our background, both Teal and I have worked in art before, but like on a very basic level for myself. When I went and was getting my game development degree, I had to take art courses. I can't draw for crap. I am not an artist, but I understand the fundamentals of art and animation. And reading this list, I was like, yes, this, yes, this.
It all comes back.
Check boxes, man. Yeah. Okay, so when you're animating, you want to think beyond just the means to the end. So as we go through this list, just remember it's more than your character walking down a hallway or holding a sword and then hitting the enemy with it.
There's a lot more.
There's a lot more. Let's start at the very beginning.
Okay, so the first principle I want to talk about is called anticipation.
Yes.
In a nutshell, anticipation is just you want to use a few frames to show your character preparing for an action. Then you can show the actual action.
So the best example of this would be in a combat situation.
Right.
And Final Fantasy 8 and 9 did this really well. But for example, let's say your character's about to attack with a sword. You know, the beginner, the amateur will just have the enemy, the character whack. Just rushes forward and whack. The good animator would have the character perhaps bring the sword back a little bit. Maybe shift their weight from one foot to the next. So, you know, my character has my sword. I bring the sword back. I shift my weight from my left foot to my right foot because I'm right-handed. And then with my weight on my right foot and my right hand holding my sword behind me, I then have my character shift forward.
Yeah.
Then I go into the running animation. Then from the running animation, I have my character bring the sword up. And I have him rotate his right hip. And then I go into the attack animation. Both of those were anticipations.
And to take it a step further, Steele mentioned.
I'm Steele.
Who are you? Steele mentioned what a good animator does. Let me just touch on what a great animator will do.
Okay.
A great animator will have the character look at the enemy and then draw their weapon.
Right.
And then move into position. The wind blows through the character's hair a little bit. A leaf blows across the battlefield to show the silence.
Yeah.
And then movement.
And as we go further down the list, you're going to see a lot of these connect. Because they really do.
Yes.
And what Teal is describing right now actually hits on the very last point of this podcast, which ties it all together. So put a pin.
Let's put a pin in it.
And what Teal just said, because that actually does go to the very end. But let's go to the next one.
Okay, so we talked about anticipation. The next one is follow through.
Yes.
See, those go hand in hand.
They do.
Anticipation and then follow through.
Yes. Yes.
Because follow through is at the end. You're going to use a few frames to show the movement after an action.
Yeah, think of it like physics catching up.
Yeah, yeah.
You know, I mean, it doesn't always have to be that way, but that's a very good example. Like, let's say when our character does his full body attack, he rushes forward and swings his sword. Well, it doesn't end when the sword swing stops at its swing arc.
Exactly.
Because he's going to go forward a little bit. Maybe he stumbles some, or maybe he catches, you know, depending on how good he is, he stumbles, or he anticipates the step and he steps properly. The wind's going to blow through his hair, or the hair's going to go forward a little bit from the stop of momentum.
Absolutely.
You know, stuff like that.
Think about the movement of clothing.
Yeah.
The clothing is going to be moving too with the character's movements and with the environment.
Right.
So think about that.
And clothing is also another pin into something later as well. Because, again, this all connects.
It all connects, guys.
So to take the first one and the second one together, whenever you're animating something, you always have to think of what the animation is going to be prior to the main, sequence, and what it is afterwards. And if you're feeling intimidated, remember, you don't have to go with like 90 frames
oh my goodness
of sequence. It can be it can just be 10. It can be really short. You know, if you're working in a pixel-based engine, you know, there's nothing wrong with having your character raise its hands.
Yeah.
You know, and then move forward and attack, and then come back and lower their hands. You know, it's a little thing.
But
something.
It's a little thing, but it is so important because it imparts some realism.
Yeah, and remember, simple engines, simple animations just have to follow these rules as well.
Absolutely. That brings us to our next point we were talking about is frame timing.
Frames are so important.
Yes. Because we all know, or we should know, that the more frames that are used, then the slower and smoother the action.
Absolutely. Absolutely. While the less frames used, the quicker and sharper it is, or as some people like to say, snappy.
Yeah.
This is all relative, though, to the FPS of the animation. So if you have a normal 60 frame per second animation sequence, you know, you have your character casting their spell.
Yeah.
Or attacking. I like to use a sword attack one because that one can be janky on purpose.
Yeah, it can be.
So you have your sword attack animation. If your sword attack animations are normally 60 frames per second, if your game runs at if your animation of your games runs at 60 frames per second, then slower for you is going to be 90 or 120.
Right.
While faster is going to be something like 45 or 30 or even 15. In other words, it's relative. So don't think that 30 frames per second is automatically, you know, super fast. It could be normal. You got to think relative to that when you're developing, when you're using the frame timing.
Yes.
Which is also why it's important to have your game run at a certain FPS. At the expected FPS.
At the expected FPS.
Yes.
Absolutely.
Kind of tying back to optimization there. And it just started raining, guys. So if you hear thunder, woo.
Yeah.
All right, what we got next?
Next one is, and again, this all ties in together, is what is called slow in, slow out.
Yes.
And what that is you want to use more frames at the start and the end of your animation. So you can show acceleration or deceleration.
Now, you're probably at this point going, oh yeah, that makes sense. Because a lot of animation's principles are based off the common sense of how the world works, but you just don't think about it unless you're a great animator that's been doing this a long time. There are people who spent an inordinate amount of time in the decades beginning with animation. Back in the day, they spent a lot of time looking at real life and figuring out how real life works, and did a lot of things that did work and didn't work. If you watch a lot of old cartoons, they were janky as hell.
Yes, they were.
You know, look at the Betty Boop cartoons.
Oh, yeah.
Beautifully drawn, terribly animated, but as time goes on, as your Disneys and your Warner Brothers and etc. continued to animate, they got better because they began to develop these techniques. So, for example, slow in and slow out is reality.
Yes, it is.
When you're starting something, you're going to move slower and then faster. And then when you're stopping something, you're faster, and then you slow down, you stop. Because it's not just a stark start or a stark stop. That's not how reality works. Animation shouldn't work that way. So, yeah, in this case, because in real life, it's the application of force. Well, in a video game, it's frames.
It's frames. And so you want to simulate friction and weight.
Yeah.
Just like in real life.
Yeah, because the heavier something is, the more it's going to slow down to a stop.
Yeah.
Speaking of weight, next one.
Ah, yes. We can squash and stretch.
Squishy, squashy, stretchy, Reggie.
Yep. So what this means is you're going to slightly squish or stretch your animation to simulate weight or elasticity.
So,
and I like that word, elasticity.
On the insanely cartoony level,
yeah,
it would be something along the lines of, your character has a boxing glove, and it's a real big one.
Yeah.
And they rear back, and then when they punch at the bad guy, their arm stretches like Stretch Armstrong.
Mm-hmm.
That is the cartoony level of squash and stretch.
Yeah.
Or, if you have your rotund clown character gets hit by a kick, his stomach absorbs it to the point where it actually indents in like he's made of rubber.
Yeah.
And then he bounces about. That's the cartoony level. Now you want to take that and dial that all the way back to reality, because it's still the same thing. If you're running forward at full tilt, when you stop, there's going to be a point where, the front of your body is still moving a little faster than the back of your body. It's going to catch up a little bit, and then it's going to come back. So you want to think about that elasticity of reality. This one is the ones where, just think cartoony and then dial it all the way back to
dial it back to reality.
Yeah. Okay.
Our next principle is
super important.
Yes. It's arc movement.
Yes.
Actions should always follow an arc as much as possible.
The best example,
of course, is your hands and your head moving while you walk.
So this is the first thing when I took my animation class at university. The very first thing they taught, day one, was they said, you're doing a walking figure wrong.
Yeah.
And then they showed us what an actual walking figure is. And it literally is, whatever the body is moving forward, the head is moving in an arc. So it's, bob, bob, bob. And the hands, arc.
Yeah.
Because that is actually reality.
Yes.
A lot of things will do this. The human figure, a bipedal figure, does this the most. Which, side tangent, the hardest thing in the world to animate is a human figure, the bipedal figure.
The hardest thing to draw, human figure. The hardest thing to animate, human figure.
And
go figure.
Side note on the side note, the hardest thing to draw, I believe, is the hand, isn't it?
Yes.
Yeah. Just which is also one of the hardest things to animate, that in the face. So anyway, that's why we have software that does that for us.
Ah, lovely software.
But the thing to remember is that when something is moving, there's generally an level of arcness, especially if it is walking. So keep that in mind. Otherwise, it's going to look weird. Shaggy in Scooby-Doo is a fantastic example of no arc movement of the head.
Oh.
You know how his head's always hunched forward kind of bit, and he just walks and he looks kind of weird?
Yeah, because he's moving on the same plane.
Yeah. And the only arc movement are his hands that kind of
they're just, kind of flooping.
Like a noodle, yeah.
Yeah.
So, all right, let's move on.
Well, the next little point is something we've been talking about, kind of touching on this whole time, and that's exaggeration.
Okay. So this is where we're going to take a break from reality. Okay, because exaggeration makes it interesting, right?
Yes, it does. Yes, absolutely.
What is our exact notation on exaggeration?
Okay. So this is extreme actions that people don't do in real life, but you put it in your animation for excitement.
Okay. So, true story. When a person does a jump kick in karate or any martial art, it never looks as good as it does in the movies. Two, it's just a jump and a kick.
Yeah.
It's not very flary.
No.
A real life jump kick. It's not very flary. And that's boring as hell. So in a video game, you have a spin or a flip. You have, a bit of a style where they lean their main body back and they kick forward like, Liu Kang doing his flying kick in Mortal Kombat. I mean, and that's the thing is when you're designing your animations, this is where you get to have fun.
Yeah.
Okay. So you've been following all these principles. You've been following these principles in order to do it the right way. Now have some fun with it. When your character swings the sword, have that whole moment where they swing their sword and their hair moves forward, the wind, the invisible wind on their hair and clothes, or watch any Arkham game.
Yeah.
And watch how Batman fights. People don't fight like that. But watch it, because that is some flair. And really, that's what exaggeration is, isn't it?
Absolutely. And also, when a character is in a state of panic or embarrassment, and they start flailing their arms up and down, up and down, up and down.
Yeah.
People don't do that in real life.
No.
Okay.
Not even your over the top anime style, people who want to pretend they're anime characters.
Right.
They don't quite flail like an anime character.
No. So that is an exaggeration right there.
Yes.
They're conveying this feeling of panic, excitement, embarrassment,
rage even.
Yeah. So yeah, they're flailing, their arms go up and down.
But then here's the thing: is that's another put in the pin. When we get to the end, you're going to see how it all fits together.
It all fits together. So exaggeration is a good thing.
Now the last main principle.
Yeah.
Because this one you're going to need to really work on, because you can easily forget this one.
Secondary action.
Secondary action.
This is so important to include. You want to use other smaller actions that complement the main one.
Now, we've actually already been talking about this. So what are those secondary actions?
Hey, well, let's see. We got hair bouncing. Your clothes that flowing clothing. Fingers curling around a sword.
That's a real good example there.
Blinking. A character blinking their eyes.
You don't think that's important? It is super important.
Yes.
Trust me, a lot of the older school games, the characters never blinked, and you could tell.
Oh, yeah.
That's what made like the first Kingdom Hearts game so interesting, is Sora would actually blink. Zidane, Squall, they didn't blink.
They did not blink.
And you can go higher too.
But you can also expand on the secondary action. Use your particle effects.
All those particle systems to create like, sparkly lines and poofy woofies, and it's a technical term, poofy woofy. Magic circles. Magical circle.
Yeah.
All of those. So anything that complements the main action and draws more life to it is a secondary action, and those are extremely important and easy to forget. Because you're so busy doing the anticipation, the follow-through, the frame timing. You're so busy giving those exaggerations with the arc movements. You're so busy doing all that you need to take into account everything.
Yeah. Because
real life isn't just a body moving. It's everything else that's a part of it. It's everything else that makes that person. Like Teal was talking about, when a person's flailing because they're embarrassed, their face turns red.
Yes,
that's a change.
Their hair, if they have longer hair, their hair is flopping. Yeah. As they're flailing.
If they're angry, the teeth are gritted and the face is tight.
Yeah.
It's all of those little things. And people were doing this even back in like the PS1 and before era. What was that game you loved? Legia?
Yeah, Legend of Legia.
Legend of Legia. Like Noah, the girl, her expression would change depending on what was happening. Whether she was flailing or jump kicking somebody in the face or whatever, her expression would radically change, because she was a hyper-expressive character. Nowadays, you need to have a level of expression.
True.
And, the secondary actions help that.
Right.
So these are the main principles. There's others that you can utilize, but those are the main principles we were able to draw that were useful.
So we hope that this helps you when you're sitting down and you're planning your animation sequences.
And again, for those of you who are intimidated, you don't have to go all out and animate every single thing.
A few key scenes.
Yeah.
That's all that you really need is just a few key scenes animated.
Right. Take it on a case-by-case basis. And if you're doing something pixel arty, for a retro-style game, just a little bit. Final Fantasy Mystic Quest. Fantastic idea.
Oh, that's a great...
The Benjamin, when he's on the map, he blinks and he shrugs. And that gives you everything you need.
Yeah.
For his little 16-bit self.
That's right.
All right, so we're going to talk about 3 more important principles. They're not these main principles here, but these 3 things you cannot ignore. They are super important.
The first is, and I'm sorry, but you're going to have to learn drawing.
Yeah.
The foundation of drawing.
Yes. So right now, if you want to be a developer and you want to be serious, you have to take drawing as serious as drafting, mapping, revising text, everything.
All of it.
You have, even the little bits of coding. Drawing is important.
So let me get into the nitty-gritty.
Let's get into it. We'll talk about each one.
All right. First is you need to learn the basic principles of human anatomy.
Yes. Yes.
You need to know the skeletal structure and how it moves. You need to learn the muscles that are on top of the skeletal structure.
Skin, how skin works. Now, does that mean that you have to be this fantastic master of drawing a human? No, not at all.
No, because I'm not.
Yeah, and Teal draws better than me. And I really am bad at sketching. But you have to understand the basics. And if someone gave me a pencil and a piece of paper and said, give me the basics of the human form, it's going to look silly. Ooh. It's going to look like a first semester art student, but it's going to be correct.
Yeah.
And that's what's important. You know, learn how the guidelines work. Those guidelines when you're creating the human form, whether it's a large head or a small head, big hands, little hands, doesn't matter.
I believe there's a book. It may still be in print, but it's one that I have. It's called The Basics of Figure Drawing.
Oh, yes.
And if you can find a book like that, practice, you'll be fine. Absolutely, you'll be fine.
And then building off of that, proportion.
Ooh, proportion.
Yes.
Yeah. Unless you're really going for this, you don't want to have a big head and small body.
Right. So, you know, again, if it's on purpose and you're going for that exaggerated big head look, but you still have to know how the proportions work.
Yeah.
You can't
to be consistent with your ratio of big head to small body.
Exactly. You can't just have a massive head on a little body and call it art. You have to have some measure of how the proportion is going to work, and then you have to, of course, be consistent across the entire model.
Right.
You know, and if you're drawing attention to really big head but tiny facial features like you're a Dick Tracy villain, that also has to be planned.
Yeah, I remember him.
Yeah, little whatever his name was, big head. But proportion's important, and equally important is perspective.
Cannot emphasize perspective enough.
Yes.
And in any drawing course or book worth its salt is going to have an entire chapter on perspective.
If you're going to be doing 3D art, I would say perspective is the most important of these.
Yeah, I would say that.
That's an opinion. But that's because, for example, if I'm sitting here in my chair right now, but I'm looking to the side to speak into my microphone and talk to Teal. You would not draw me with my torso straight and my head cocked 45 degrees to the right. That would look ridiculous.
That would be very strange.
My shoulders are slightly tilted. My legs are more straight. Actually, they're a little bit to the other side. So you want to look at that perspective. And then the exaggerated perspective, where the dancer, you know, the body of the dancer is facing to the left, but the head's all the way to the right with the arms outstretched. Perspective is super important.
And just to build on that, perspective is more than just the position of your object or your model. It's also the camera's position.
Yes. So
you can have a 5'6" dancer, but if your camera is looking from a 45-degree angle from top right to bottom left, the way you draw those legs and those arms is going to change.
Completely.
You're not going to have your legs and your arms be the same length as they would be looking straight on.
Easy test. Dancer. Take your cell phone, put it in selfie mode, take a picture of yourself straight on. With your arm, you know, have your arm outstretched like you're, so that you're getting your whole body. Have your other arm next to you so you can do like little anime, V sign, ding. Take a picture of yourself. Then bring it up 45 degrees and rotate it to the left or the right 45 degrees and take the same picture. You're
going to see the differences in the length of different parts.
And in the top of your head is going to look larger in the second shot because it's closer to the lens.
Right.
So again, perspective is uber important.
Yes, it is.
But now let's talk about the tones here. So what's the first part of tone?
Well, obviously shadow.
Shadow.
Learn
how shadows work. And this builds into our lighting conversation from earlier.
Yeah.
Shadows, super important.
Shadows and highlights.
Yes. Highlights are where the light is hitting the most. Shadows where the light's hitting the least. It changes the composition of a figure. It changes the way something looks. And it's going to change the way the animation looks.
Yes, it is.
So these are things you have to look at. But equally important, and Teal would probably know a little bit more about this than me, is the graduation of tone.
Yes, absolutely. This goes into what I talked about, color theory.
Right.
And having those gradients of tone lends a very lifelike perspective, a very lifelike view of your animation. Cartoons are basically, just stark colors. A lot of them use the primary colors, maybe use the secondary colors too. But a more realistic shot has just gradients of tone.
Right.
And that's what differentiates the cartoon from the real life.
That is why you can tell a cel-shaded game very different from a non-cel-shaded game. Because a cel-shaded game has a overtly cartoonish look.
Oh, yeah.
While a non-cel-shaded one can look far more realistic. Again, it's a style choice. And you don't get to ignore gradients, those graduation and gradients of tone. You don't get to ignore that just because it's a cel-shaded game. You just look at it differently.
Yes. Here's my next little thing I want to bring out. I do see this in a lot of folks who are just starting out. And I want to caution you guys to avoid twinning. And what I mean by that is those symmetrical poses, please don't overuse them. I mean, I know that it's easier, just to you made one thing. Oh, that's great. I'm going to copy that. Sorry, you don't get a pass. You really don't.
Yeah, life is definitely not symmetrical.
Life is not symmetrical. Symmetry is boring. Yeah. So I'm sorry you got to put in the work. You need to avoid what we call twinning. Yeah,
think of it like this. If your character's right arm moves 45 degrees up, you don't need to have the elbow move 45 degrees.
Thank you. No, you don't. And please don't. That would look really weird.
And if the character's right arm moves 45 degrees up, the left arm doesn't have to move 45 degrees down. You do not approach it like a math problem. Okay, so now we're going to get into what ties everything in together.
Ah, yes. Appeal. Visual appeal. This is everything.
Every single thing that we've talked about today ties into appeal.
Yes. So design your characters, design their animations, do it in a way that showcases their personality.
Yeah. Think of things like the proportions, of their bodies. Their pose. Does their pose denote confidence?
Yeah. Their expressions.
Yeah. Does their expression denote a personality shift? Like, for example, the furrowed-browed boss, who's got the cigar in his mouth, like, "Hide everybody back to white." He's kind of a jerk.
Yeah.
And his expression shows that. If the character's wearing clothes.
Clothing is its own physics.
Yeah, and the costumes.
The costumes move.
When you're designing your character and designing how their costume moves, take that into account with the personality. A clown, for example. A clown, for example, that's, in an idle pose kind of bouncing around with the jingle bells, jingle, jingle, jingle. He's got a goofy grin, is totally different than a clown whose suit is weighted down with red stuff. With a menacing grin. Two totally different.
Very different.
Even though it could technically be the same model.
So there's that. And style.
Yeah, style's super important. The whole style.
Your style is just bringing it all together.
Look at Johnny Bravo.
Oh, yeah. That's
Johnny Bravo is a fantastic example of using every piece of animation to draw the appeal of the character. Because he walks with a swagger. He raises his eyebrow, "Oh, mama," that kind of thing. But there's an underlying overconfidence and lack of sincerity with the character. He looks and walks like someone who's all bravado with very little substance. And that's on purpose.
It is on purpose. Even when he's doing his silly poses.
Yeah, they're very, talk about silly poses. Watch the Full Metal Alchemist.
Oh, that's
Armstrong.
A good one.
Armstrong's a great example.
Yeah.
That's taken to a humongous extreme, like a ridiculous extreme.
Sure, it's exaggeration.
But he oozes confidence.
Yeah.
Down to the pink sparkles. Because pink can be manly.
Absolutely, yes. Yes, it can.
Yeah. Okay, so
we take it all together. The less your player notices the individual components of your animation, unless they're looking for it, the better. It needs to be just totally seamless. It's just part of the experience that the player's going through. you don't think about when you're walking through a room, you don't go, oh, that lamp is moving a little bit. And, oh, there's a ceiling fan going. And, oh, there's a shadow on the carpet. You don't walk through a room doing that.
Yep.
On your way to something else.
Mm-hmm. but think about it in that regard. And it's everything. The lighting, the texturing, the animation, the sound.
All of it.
The more that's invisible to the player, the better.
Yeah. Because the whole focus is the players moving from one thing to another.
Yeah.
They're focusing on the story, what they're doing. They're not focusing on, they shouldn't be focusing on the room that they have to be walking through at the time.
They're focusing on, and this goes back to the very first episode of season 2, the user experience. That's it. Yeah. Okay, so now it's time to take questions from our live audience.
If you've been watching, remember to use the podcast question feature in our chat.
Now, while we wait for potential questions to show up, I want to mention something we talked about earlier, which is the, oh God, do I have to learn this? So the answer is yes, but it's also, you don't have to be a master.
No,
okay?
Because neither of us are. Guys, you don't have to be stellar at this. You just need to understand how it's done and why it's done.
Because especially if you end up being part of a team and you have an animator, because there are people who love drawing.
And they're good at it.
And they love modeling. And they love rigging. And they love animating. You need to be able to communicate.
Sure.
And it can't just be, well, I'd kind of like this character to have a kind of a swagger. I mean, you need to be able to say, speak their language. Actually be able to say that, there's a slight bounce when they walk from their rubber shoes or whatever. You need to be able to actually communicate that. Yeah. And if you don't know how animation works, you can't communicate to an animator how it should look.
That's it right there.
They're going to create it on their interpretation.
Yep. So make sure that you know how to communicate to them what your vision is. Yeah.
So do you have to learn how to draw? Yes. Do you have to be a master at it? Hell no. So do you have to learn how hatching works? You have to understand it. Do you have to be able to, use cross hatching until your dragon looks like it's, Smog instead of Trogdor? No, not at all.
Sure.
Not at all. You just have to understand the principles.
Yeah.
Same thing with lighting. Same thing with writing. Same thing with texturing. Same thing with shaders. Every single part of game design, you, the developer, have to know. And then the parts you can't master, the parts you can't really get the technical side down, you get someone else to do.
Sure. But you still have a basic understanding of it.
And you don't ignore it. You're not allowed to ignore animation.
Nope.
And then put out your game and say, well, animation's not really the strong point. If you don't try, it's not going to fly.
Yeah. And that's a good one. If you don't try, it's not going to fly. I like that.
All right. Since we're not seeing any questions, this is a good time to end it.
All right.
Please note, we are not going to be streaming our podcast for the next 2 weeks because
that's correct.
Next Saturday is Christmas.
And the following Saturday is New Year's.
So we will be back the next Saturday.
I believe that's the 8th of January.
Hopefully.
I think so. Yeah. Saturday the 8th.
Where we will continue with season 2.
Yes.
We want to give a thanks out to our live audience for listening.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. And we want to give a thanks to anyone who's listening to us later, whether it be on iHeartRadio, Amazon Music, iTunes, Spotify, etc., etc., etc. We love you guys very much.
Yes, thank you very much for being here with us.
100%. So join us next time for DLC Not Included. And remember,
anyone can give you the key, but you have to go through the door.